All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're unpacking a really fascinating story from our English reading series today, specifically Lesson 2, which is titled Mika's Homestay in London. Now, right off the bat, I want to say this isn't just your standard run-of-the-mill reading comprehension exercise. It's actually a really compelling narrative about cultural immersion, setting strict goals, and honestly, the unexpected lessons we end up learning when we finally step outside our comfort zones. Let's dive in.
So, think back for a second. What did you ask for on your 19th birthday? Maybe it was, I don't know, a new gadget, some clothes, or maybe just a special dinner out with your friends. Well, our protagonist, Mika, was asked this exact same question by her parents, and her initial response was pretty typical. She just said, a ring. But instead of getting her a piece of jewelry, her parents completely flipped the script. They gave her a 1-month homestay in London. Talk about an upgrade, right?
Section 1. A unique birthday gift. This reading passage immediately sets up a literal call to adventure. It takes a totally standard life milestone, a birthday, and uses it as the launchpad for a massive international journey. And as a reader, it immediately makes you wonder, how exactly is a 19-year-old going to handle spending an entire month halfway across the world, living with total strangers?
Section 2. Planning for success.
Well, as it turns out, Mika didn't just toss some clothes in a bag and hop on the next flight to Heathrow. She was incredibly methodical about this whole thing. She actually put together a highly specific checklist of requirements for her host family. Taking her parents' advice, she requested a family with both a mother and a father, native-born British people, non-smoking, middle class, and living near a subway station. This is brilliant because it illustrates just how intentional she was about her environment. She absolutely was not leaving her cultural immersion up to chance. She was engineering it for the best possible outcome. And she even notes later on that this was fantastic advice because some of her friends who didn't do this ended up having pretty big problems with their host families.
And you know, this strict intentionality carried right over into her educational planning too. She researched English schools in London and eventually settled on Oxford House College. Why that one? Well, for two very practical reasons. The fees were reasonable, and crucially, there were very few Japanese students there. Think about the strategy behind that for a second. She is intentionally cutting off her own safety net. By choosing a school where hardly anyone speaks her native language, she's forcing herself to rely entirely on English. It is a bold and honestly a brilliant move for anyone trying to learn a language.
Section 3. London Life and Potatoes.
So, as we all know, preparation is amazing, but reality? Reality is always a little different. Once Mika actually arrived in London, she faced some immediate and, frankly, pretty funny culture shocks. Her diet was a huge adjustment. She literally writes, potatoes. It took me a little time to get used to the many kinds of potato dishes served. We're talking fried potatoes, steamed potatoes, sliced potatoes, just potatoes everywhere. Coming from a traditional Japanese diet, this massive carb-heavy shift was super noticeable for her. But thankfully, her host mother was a fantastic cook who made really delicious pasta, chicken, and even cooked rice for her every now and then, which nicely blended their two cultures right there at the dinner table.
Outside the dining room, her social life absolutely blossomed, and in very global ways. First, she explored London with Nadish, a French girl who is actually another homestay student living in the exact same house. Plus, on Saturday evenings, Mika would join her host parents, Mr. and Mrs. Flannery, at their favorite pub to just hang out and spend time together. Our culture notes from the text remind us here that in the UK, pubs aren't just bars. They're really casual, communal places where people go to eat, drink, and socialize. So Mika wasn't just sitting on the sidelines observing British culture, she was actively participating in it with a wonderfully international group of people.
Section 4. Navigating New Perspectives.
Of course, it wasn't entirely smooth sailing, especially once she got into the classroom. Remember how Mika chose Oxford House specifically because it had so few Japanese students? Well, it turns out there were still at least 2 in each of her classes. Mika really tried to speak up a lot, but she noticed a pretty frustrating reality. A lot of the Japanese students didn't actually use their English very much, even the ones who had really large vocabularies. They just naturally defaulted to the comfort zone of speaking only Japanese with their friends. It's a really sharp observation by Mika, and it proves that just being physically located in a foreign country doesn't automatically mean you're immersing yourself, not if you don't actually put in the effort.
Then things get really interesting because Mika runs into some direct cultural stereotyping. Her French friend tells her about an assumption their teacher made, that Japanese people work too hard and that they're all very rich. Now what's fascinating here isn't the stereotype itself, but how Mika reacts to it. She notes that she completely disagreed with those points, but instead of getting angry or defensive about it, she just gets curious. She writes that she was genuinely interested in knowing what foreign people thought. That represents a massive leap in maturity and cultural intelligence on her part.
Section 5. The real value of English. Which brings us to the real emotional and educational climax of our explainer today. In Mika's own words, she says, "1 month in London made me realize that speaking English was very important because it is the language that people from many countries use." This is her huge aha moment. Mika realizes that English isn't just, a boring list of vocabulary words in a textbook, it's a bridge. It is the core, common tool that literally allows a Japanese student, a French student, and a British family to connect, to share meals, and to actually understand each other's completely different perspectives.
And that realization, it leads right into her ultimate goal, becoming open-minded about people from different countries. She explicitly states that she wants to be more open-minded, just like her host family was. So her 1-month homestay successfully completely transformed her worldview. She didn't just learn a language, she really learned how to be a global citizen. And this aligns perfectly with the broader educational themes of the textbook, which is ultimately aiming to use these reading exercises to broaden our views on global issues and concerns.
What's really cool is how the source material goes way beyond just telling us a fun story. The textbook actively prompts students to evaluate Mika's specific decisions, like going entirely alone, choosing a school with very few Japanese students, or insisting on living with native-born people. By asking us to list out the advantages and the disadvantages of each of those choices, the text pushes us to really think critically about the actual mechanics of studying abroad. It asks you directly, would Mika's strict rules work for you?
So, that brings us to a final thought to wrap up today's explainer. Mika's journey was undeniably incredibly successful, but it definitely begs a bigger question for all of us. Is traveling abroad the absolute best way to learn a new language? Can you replicate Mika's strict, zero-safety net immersion without actually leaving your home country? Or is that physical culture shock, the endless potatoes, the local pubs, being surrounded by varied international opinions, an absolutely necessary part of achieving true fluency? I want you to really chew on that based on everything we've unpacked today. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on Mika's incredible journey. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you next time.